The battlefield was quiet, but not with peace. It was the kind of silence that came after chaos, the type that pressed down on a soldier's chest and reminded him how fragile everything was. Daniel, a human infantry soldier, walked through the ruins of an alien city, his boots crunching against broken stone and shattered glass. His rifle was slung across his back, though there was no one left to fight. Smoke curled from the collapsed buildings, and the air smelled of ash and dust. His unit had been ordered to secure the area, but Daniel was alone. The others had pushed ahead while he stayed back to check for survivors. Most soldiers would not bother. The city had belonged to the Veyari Empire, humanity's rivals in this corner of the galaxy. But Daniel had a habit his superiors disliked. He always stopped to help. He moved past a toppled tower and froze when he heard it. A sound, faint but clear. A cry. Daniel turned, heart pounding. For a moment he thought it was his imagination, just echoes in the ruins, but then it came again, weaker this time, like someone buried alive calling for help. He hurried toward the noise, stumbling over fallen beams and scorched stone until he reached what had once been a wide marketplace. There, beneath a collapsed column, he saw movement. Pale fingers clawed weakly at the rubble. Daniel dropped to his knees and began shifting the debris. His gloves burned from the heat still clinging to the broken rocks, but he ignored it. Piece by piece, he pulled the stone away until at last he uncovered a face. It was an alien woman. Her skin glimmered faintly silver in the dim light, her eyes an unusual shade of violet that glowed with both pain and stubbornness. She looked young, though with aliens it was hard to tell. Her body was pinned from the waist down under the column. She stared at him, confusion mixing with disbelief. Humans and Veyari were enemies. Soldiers did not save each other. They finished the job. Yet here was this human, pulling stones away like his own life depended on hers. "Don't move," Daniel said firmly, though he knew she couldn't understand his language. Still, his tone carried meaning. He placed a hand on her shoulder to keep her still, then pushed harder against the rubble. The column was heavier than anything he had lifted before. His arms trembled, his muscles screamed, but inch by inch, it shifted. Dust poured over his face, stinging his eyes. Finally, with one last desperate push, the stone rolled aside. The alien woman gasped, her body jerking free. Daniel quickly pulled her into his arms, noticing the blood running down her leg. He grabbed his field kit and began working, just as he had done 100 times for fellow soldiers. He wrapped her wounds, sprayed a clotting agent, and tied a pressure bandage. His hands were steady, practiced, though his mind whirled with questions. Why was he doing this? She was the enemy. She was part of the empire that had brought war to human colonies. But as he looked into her wide violet eyes, Daniel knew the answer. She was alive. She was in pain. That was all that mattered. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sounds were her shallow breaths and the distant crackle of flames. Then, slowly, she raised a trembling hand and touched his arm. It was not a gesture of fear, but one of astonishment. Daniel gave a small nod, trying to comfort her. "You'll be okay," he said softly, though again she could not understand. Still, she seemed to relax, her eyes closing for a second as if trusting him. He shifted her weight, preparing to carry her out of the ruins. She was lighter than he expected, her frame delicate, her silver hair falling across his shoulder as he lifted her. Step by step, he made his way through the broken marketplace, his boots slipping on rubble but never letting her fall. The strange quiet of the ruined city wrapped around them as he carried her, and Daniel wondered what her story was. Was she a soldier? A civilian? A leader? Whoever she was, she had not deserved to die under crushed stone. When he finally reached the edge of the ruins, he set her down gently against a half-broken wall. He offered her water from his flask, and though she hesitated at first, she drank. The faintest trace of a smile touched her lips, and Daniel was struck by how human that expression looked. Above them, the sky was dark, filled with smoke trails of distant ships. The war was far from over, and he knew both sides would soon return to fight again. But for this moment, there was no war. Just a soldier and a stranger, bound by an act of simple kindness. As Daniel adjusted the bandage on her leg, the woman spoke for the first time. The words were strange, lyrical, impossible for him to understand. But her tone carried gratitude. She whispered something again, staring at him as if memorizing his face. Daniel only shook his head. "Sorry. Don't understand you." Still, the look in her eyes said enough. She knew he had saved her when he had no reason to. She knew he had risked his life to give her a chance to live. In that moment, Daniel did not realize the weight of what he had done. He did not know that this alien woman was not an ordinary survivor, but Queen Araleth herself, the ruler of the Veyari Empire. To him, she was just someone in need, and that was why he helped her. The ruins stretched behind him, silent witnesses to his choice. Ahead lay the uncertain future, one he could not imagine yet. For now, Daniel only sat beside the alien woman, keeping watch as the night deepened, unaware that this single decision would change not only his life, but the fate of two species. Daniel woke to the sound of voices echoing through the ruins. The night had passed slowly, filled with the cold bite of alien winds and the smell of smoke that never seemed to fade. He had stayed beside the injured woman, making sure her bandages held and that no scavengers or enemy soldiers came near. Now, faint lights cut through the darkness. Shapes appeared in the distance, tall figures with gleaming armor and weapons that looked far more advanced than anything humans carried. Their helmets glowed faintly, and their steps were sharp, disciplined. Daniel stiffened. He knew immediately they were Veyari soldiers. His rifle was nearby, but he didn't reach for it. He wasn't foolish enough to think he could fight an entire squad while holding an injured woman. The alien soldiers surrounded him in a tight circle. Their weapons hummed with energy, aimed directly at his chest. Daniel raised his hands slowly, showing he meant no harm. One of them barked in their language, harsh and clipped. Daniel couldn't understand, but the tone was clear. "Step away from her." Before Daniel could move, the woman stirred. She pushed against the wall, her voice weak but commanding. She spoke a string of words in Veyari tongue, her tone carrying both authority and irritation. The soldiers froze. For a moment they looked stunned. Then, as if struck by realization, they all dropped to one knee, heads bowed. Daniel blinked in confusion. He looked at the woman, who now sat straighter despite her injuries. Her violet eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, and her silver hair caught the flicker of burning ruins like strands of light. He had thought she was just a survivor, but judging by the soldiers' reaction, she was someone much more. The woman turned to him. Her expression was serious now, but her gaze was steady. She spoke softly in her own language, as if trying to tell him something important. Daniel shook, his head helplessly. "I don't understand," he whispered. Still she leaned closer, resting a hand on his arm. Her touch was gentle, yet it carried weight. She said a single word clearly, pointing at herself. "Araleth." Daniel understood. It was her name. He nodded slowly. "Araleth." She gave a small, approving smile. Then she pointed at him with a questioning look. "Daniel," he said simply. Her lips shaped the word, repeating it with surprising ease. "Daniel." Before he could say more, two of the soldiers approached and carefully lifted Araleth into their arms. She gave them instructions, her voice sharp enough to remind them who she was. But even as they carried her toward a waiting shuttle that hovered nearby, she kept looking back at Daniel. He didn't know it yet, but by saving her life, he had stepped into a chain of traditions older than his entire species. The shuttle carried them through the alien sky to a palace of shimmering towers and curved walls that glowed with soft energy. Daniel had never seen such architecture before. It looked both alive and impossibly advanced. The moment they landed, the soldiers guided him inside. He expected to be thrown into a cell, or at the very least interrogated. Instead, he was brought into a vast hall filled with banners and guards, all kneeling as Araleth was carried in on a high platform. Only then did Daniel realize the truth. This woman he had saved was not just someone important. She was the Queen of the Veyari, the ruler of an empire humanity had been fighting for years. The chamber filled with whispers. The council members, tall and elegant, studied Daniel with narrowed eyes. They spoke quickly among themselves in a language he could not follow. One elder, dressed in robes lined with jewels, finally addressed Araleth. His voice was smooth but carried tension. He gestured at Daniel, then spread his arms as if asking for an explanation. Araleth's reply was firm. She gestured toward Daniel, her voice rising with authority. The council murmured, their eyes flicking between the queen and the human soldier. Daniel stood silently, trying to guess what was happening. He could feel the weight of every gaze in the room pressing down on him. He was a stranger here, completely at their mercy. Then something unexpected happened. Araleth rose to her feet, despite her injuries. She raised her hand and spoke a phrase that echoed through the chamber. Life debt. The single word was translated by one of the aides nearby, who whispered the meaning in broken English. Daniel understood enough. By saving her life, he had earned something sacred. But what exactly did it mean? The elder turned pale. His eyes widened as he repeated the phrase to the others. The council erupted into noise. Some shouted in protest, others bowed their heads in reluctant acceptance. Daniel only caught fragments of what the aide explained to him. Our law, if one saves the monarch, not servant, not ally, but bound, forever, no choice. Daniel frowned. Bound? To what? The aide hesitated, then spoke with difficulty. To her, to the queen, it means marriage. Daniel's stomach dropped. Marriage? That couldn't be right. He had just tried to help someone trapped under a stone. He hadn't signed up to be bound to the most powerful alien ruler in this part of the galaxy. But the expressions around him told him it was no mistake. The law was clear. Saving the queen's life was not an act repaid with gold or thanks. It was an eternal bond, one that no council or army could break. Araleth stepped toward him. Her injuries made her movement slow, but her gaze was steady. She looked at him not with hostility, but with something else, respect, perhaps even gratitude. She spoke softly, her voice carrying only to him. Though he couldn't understand the words, the tone was unmistakable. You saved me. I choose this. Daniel's mind raced. He was a soldier, a man used to orders, missions, and survival. He had never imagined being tied to royalty, much less alien royalty, and yet here he stood, at the center of a tradition that had just rewritten his future. Around them, the chamber quieted as the council waited. The queen had spoken, and the law was absolute. The human soldier who had risked his life for her was now more than just a soldier. He was her consort, her husband, by the binding customs of her people. Daniel didn't know what to say. He didn't know whether to laugh, argue, or simply collapse from the weight of it all. All he could do was meet Araleth's violet gaze, seeing in her eyes not just a ruler, but a woman whose life he had changed forever. And in that silent exchange, he understood one thing. Whatever path lay ahead, there was no turning back. The news spread faster than light. Across the stars, whispers turned into loud voices. The human soldier who saved the Veyari queen would become her husband. On human colonies, soldiers laughed in disbelief. Daniel, married to an alien queen? Some said, shaking their heads. Others worried it was a trick, a way for the Veyari to claim power over humans. On alien worlds, people filled the streets, lighting silver torches and singing ancient songs. To them, it was more than gossip. It was a legend being born. Daniel, however, felt none of that excitement. He stood in a tall chamber inside the Veyari palace, staring at his reflection in polished metal. The robe they gave him shimmered faintly, its fabric so fine that light seemed to run across it like water. It was nothing like the simple uniform he was used to wearing. He tugged at the collar, uncomfortable. A servant entered, bowing. "The ceremony begins soon, human Daniel," he said in broken English. Daniel sighed. "Yeah, I figured." He turned back to the mirror. His face looked the same as always. Tired eyes, short brown hair, a scar across his jaw from a battle long ago. He didn't look like a royal figure. He looked like a soldier pretending to be something he wasn't. Still, there was no turning. Back to the palace's great hall was filled with thousands of Veyari citizens, nobles, and soldiers. High above, silver banners waved in the air, glowing faintly as if alive. The floor was polished crystal, reflecting the light of floating lanterns that drifted like stars. Daniel walked down the long path, every eye on him. Whispers rose like waves. The human, the outsider, the one who saved her. At the far end, Queen Araleth waited. She wore a gown of woven light, silver threads flowing like water down her form. Her crown rested lightly against her silver hair, and her violet eyes glowed with calm power. She looked every part the ruler of a vast empire, while Daniel felt like a lost soldier caught in a dream. When he reached her, she extended her hand. Her fingers were delicate, yet when Daniel took them, he felt strength there. The hall went silent. The elder from the council stepped forward holding a staff carved with ancient symbols. He spoke in Veyari language, his voice echoing through the hall. Daniel couldn't understand the words, but the tone was clear: tradition, duty, law. Finally, the elder paused. A translator whispered into Daniel's ear, "Do you, Daniel of humanity, accept the bond of life debt, to stand with Queen Araleth, ruler of the Veyari, in alliance eternal?" Daniel swallowed. He wanted to say no. He wanted to shout that this was a mistake, that he wasn't ready for this. But when he looked into Araleth's eyes, he saw not a distant queen, but the same woman he had pulled from the rubble. She was alive because of him. And now, in some strange way, he was alive because of her. "I do," Daniel said, his voice steady. The elder turned to Araleth, speaking the same words in their tongue. She lifted her chin and replied firmly, "I do." The staff struck the ground with a sharp sound, and the hall erupted in cheers. The bond was sealed. The celebration lasted hours. Veyari musicians played strange instruments that filled the air with deep, echoing tones. Dancers moved in patterns that told stories of old victories and eternal unity. Servants carried trays of glowing fruit and silver drinks that shimmered like liquid stars. Daniel sat beside Araleth on a raised platform, feeling the weight of 1,000 stares. He leaned toward her and muttered, "You know, where I come from, marriage usually involves cake and dancing, not all this." Araleth tilted her head, her lips curving in the faintest smile. "Cake?" she repeated carefully, as if testing the human word. Daniel chuckled. "Yeah, sweet food. Maybe I'll bake one for you someday." For the first time since he had met her, she laughed. A quiet, melodic sound that surprised even her council members. Some nobles frowned at her openness, but others seemed relieved to see their queen smile. Yet not everyone celebrated. In the corners of the hall, several nobles whispered to each other, their eyes sharp and cold. They saw Daniel not as a hero, but as an intruder, a human who had no right to stand beside their queen. Their whispers carried promises of future resistance. Later, as the hall grew quieter and the guests departed, Daniel found himself walking with Araleth through a private garden. The air smelled of alien flowers that glowed faintly blue under the moonlight. "I don't understand your laws," Daniel admitted, his voice low. "Back home, saving someone's life doesn't mean this." Araleth looked at him, her expression unreadable. "For my people, the bond is sacred. A life saved cannot be left unrecognized. You are tied to me now, Daniel, not just by law, but by choice I made." Daniel stopped walking. "Choice? I thought the law forced this." "The law gives the bond," Araleth replied softly. "But I chose to accept it. I could have refused. I could have said you were only a soldier doing his duty. But—" She paused, her eyes meeting his. "You risked everything when you had nothing to gain. That is rare among rulers. That is why I chose you." Daniel didn't know what to say. He was just a soldier, a man who did what felt right. But hearing her words, he felt something shift inside him. "You're not what I expected either," he admitted with a faint smile. For a moment, silence stretched between them, not heavy but calm. Two lives, two worlds, standing side by side under alien stars, but peace never lasted long. The next morning, Daniel awoke to the sound of raised voices in the council chamber. He entered quietly, hearing words from the translator. Unworthy, outsider, human weakness, threat to the throne. The nobles were angry. Some demanded the bond be broken, even if tradition forbade it. Others warned that enemies of the crown would see this as weakness, an opening to strike. Araleth stood firm. "He saved me when no one else was there," she declared, her voice carrying through the hall. "That is worth more than bloodlines or politics. He will remain by my side." The council fell silent, though their eyes still burned with suspicion. Daniel realized then that this marriage was more than ceremony. It was politics, power, and danger. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was a symbol, one that many wanted to see fall. That night, as Daniel stood on the balcony of the palace, staring at the alien city spread below him, he whispered to himself, "What have I gotten into?" But deep inside, he also knew. For the first time in his life, his actions had changed more than a single battle. They had changed the future of two civilizations, and it was only the beginning. The first week of Daniel's life as the Queen's consort passed like a storm. Every hall he walked through was filled with whispers. Servants bowed but glanced at him with curiosity. Guards stiffened when he approached, unsure whether to treat him as an honored figure or as an intruder in their world. Daniel kept telling himself he was just a soldier. But soldiers weren't usually given rooms lined with crystal walls or meals served on plates that glowed faintly in the dark. He felt out of place, like a guest in someone else's dream. Araleth, however, seemed unchanged by the shift. She carried herself with the same calm strength as before, leading councils, giving orders, and meeting dignitaries. Yet Daniel noticed something new in her gaze when they were alone. She looked at him not just as her savior, but as someone she could lean on. Still, trouble was growing. One evening, during a meeting in the High Council chamber, an urgent messenger rushed in. His voice was trembling as he spoke in the Veyari language. Daniel couldn't follow the words, but he saw the reaction. The council members stiffened, their eyes wide with concern. The translator beside Daniel whispered quickly, "Rival faction, border attack, ships moving toward the capital." Daniel frowned. So soon? He had expected political struggles, maybe arguments in the council. But this was more than that. It was war knocking on their door. Araleth stood. Her violet eyes shone with steel. "Summon the fleets," she commanded in her tongue. Her voice echoed through the chamber. "We will not allow them to threaten our people." The council obeyed, though Daniel noticed the doubt in their expressions. Some looked at him, clearly wondering if the sudden attacks were somehow tied to his presence. That night, Daniel found Araleth alone on a balcony, her silver hair catching the light of alien moons. "They think this is because of me," Daniel said quietly, stepping closer. Araleth did not look surprised. Enemies always seek weakness. They believe our bond is one. They are wrong. Daniel leaned on the railing, staring at the glowing city below. "I'm no ruler. I'm no prince. I can't command armies or speak in your councils. I don't even know your language." Araleth finally turned, her expression soft but firm. "But you know battle, you know survival, and you know loyalty. That is enough." Daniel gave a short laugh. "It doesn't feel like enough." "Then let us make it enough," she replied, her voice calm but determined. The next day, the attacks began. Enemy ships, painted in the dark crimson colors of a rival Veyari faction, swept into the outer defenses. Explosions lit the sky, and the capital shook under distant thunder. The palace walls trembled, though they were built to withstand sieges. Daniel stood with Araleth in the war chamber, a wide circular room filled with holographic maps. Alien officers spoke rapidly, pointing at shifting red lines of enemy forces. Daniel couldn't follow every word, but he could read the fear in their voices. Finally, Araleth turned to him. "What do you see, Daniel?" she asked. He hesitated. "You want my opinion?" "Yes." Daniel studied the map. The enemy fleet pressed hard on the front lines, drawing the capital's defenders out to meet them. It looked like a strong push, but to Daniel's eyes, it was too strong, too obvious. "They're pulling your ships away," he said slowly. "This here." He pointed to a weak spot on the hologram. "That's where they'll strike next. They'll hit you from the side, cut off your main fleet, and then—" "You're trapped," the officers murmured in surprise. Some frowned, unwilling to take advice from a human soldier. But Araleth's gaze sharpened. "You are certain?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "It's the same trick enemy generals tried on my unit years ago. We nearly didn't make it out. They'll try the same here." Araleth did not hesitate. She gave orders in a clear, steady voice. Fleets were repositioned. Traps were laid. Hours later, her decision proved right. The rival faction launched their surprise flank and flew directly into the Queen's ambush. Veyari ships rained fire from hidden positions, and the enemy was forced into retreat. The war chamber erupted in cheers. Officers bowed to the Queen, their voices praising her foresight. Yet Daniel knew the truth. It had been his soldiers' instincts that had saved them. Araleth glanced at him, a small smile touching her lips. But victories came with costs. In the following days, assassination attempts struck inside the palace, a poisoned cup left near Araleth's throne, a shadowed figure with a blade slipping into Daniel's chambers at night. Guards caught most of them, but the message was clear. Enemies wanted him gone. Daniel fought back when he had to. One night he wrestled an attacker to the ground using nothing but brute force and training. The alien guards arrived too late, stunned to see the humans standing over the captured assassin. Word spread quickly. The Queen's consort was not only symbolic, he could fight. Still, doubt lingered among the nobles. In a council meeting, one of them finally spoke openly. "This human has no place here," the noble said, his tone sharp. "He is not of our blood, not of our culture. He invites attack and brings danger into our palace. Remove him before more lives are lost." The chamber grew tense. Many nodded in agreement, Araleth rose to her feet, her violet eyes blazing. "You would speak of danger? He saved me when I lay dying in the ruins. He saw no crown, no throne, only a life in need. And now, when enemies rise against us, he sees what even our best generals do not. He is not the weakness you claim. He is our strength." Silence followed. No one dared argue against her. Daniel, sitting at her side, felt heat rise in his chest. He wasn't sure he deserved her faith, but hearing her words, he silently promised himself he would not let her down. That evening, as the city calmed after the victory, Daniel stood once again on the palace balcony. Araleth joined him, her gown catching the soft glow of moonlight. "You defended me today," Daniel said quietly. "Against your own people." Araleth looked at him, her expression gentle. "Because you defended me first, in the ruins, when no one else would. That moment was not chance. It was truth. You are bound to me, Daniel, not just by law, but by trust." Daniel exhaled slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. He had never asked for this bond, never expected it. But now, he understood. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was part of something far larger, something that would shape the future of both their peoples. He turned to her, a small smile forming. "Then I'll keep standing by you, whatever comes next." Araleth's eyes softened, and for the first time, she placed her hand over his. "And I will stand by you." The stars above burned brighter that night, as if witnessing the vow between them. But in the shadows beyond the palace, enemies still gathered, waiting for their chance to strike. Again, the true test of their bond had only just begun. The palace had returned to its rhythm, but Daniel noticed something in the air. Tension. The rival faction had been pushed back, but no one believed the danger was over. Soldiers patrolled day and night, nobles argued in hidden corners, and whispers of betrayal still spread like fire through dry grass. Daniel, however, spent most of his days in the training yards. He needed something familiar, something that felt like home. Watching Veyari soldiers practice gave him that chance. Their movements were precise, almost flawless, every strike and parry drilled into perfection. But to Daniel's eyes, it also looked rigid. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, until one soldier finally noticed him staring. "Does the human disapprove?" the alien warrior asked sharply, his English broken but clear. Daniel shrugged. "Not disapprove. Just, you fight like machines, no room for mistakes. But battles are full of mistakes." The soldier frowned, clearly insulted. A few others gathered, murmuring among themselves. To them, Daniel was still an outsider, a man who had no right to judge their ways. Araleth arrived soon after, watching from the edge of the yard. Her presence calmed the soldiers, but her eyes were on Daniel. "What do you see?" she asked. Daniel sighed. "They're good. Better than any human unit I've seen. But they don't improvise. They don't adapt. One surprise, one unexpected move from the enemy, and they'll break." Araleth tilted her head. "Then show them the human way." Daniel hesitated. He wasn't a teacher. He was just a soldier who had survived too many battles. But when he saw the doubt in the soldier's eyes, he realized this was his chance, not only to prove himself, but to help them survive what was coming. The next day, Daniel stood in the yard with a group of curious but skeptical soldiers. He wore simple armor, borrowed from the palace stores, though it felt awkward compared to his old uniform. "All right," he began, raising his voice. "First lesson, stop thinking about perfection. War is chaos. You won't always have the perfect formation. You won't always have the perfect weapon. Sometimes you fight with whatever's in your hands, even if it's a rock." The soldiers laughed softly at his words. But Daniel only smirked. He picked up a loose training stick from the ground and tossed his blade aside. "Attack me!" They hesitated. Then one soldier rushed forward, weapon raised in a perfect arc. Daniel dodged, tripped him with the stick, and sent him sprawling in the dirt. Another came, faster this time, and Daniel rolled aside, striking him lightly across the back. Within minutes, 3 trained warriors lay groaning on the ground, defeated by a human holding nothing but a stick. The watching crowd gasped. Daniel pointed at them with the stick. "See, you're trained to fight like statues. You expect every battle to follow rules. But enemies don't follow rules. They cheat. They trick you. They hit you where you're weakest. You need to think like them or you'll lose." The soldiers exchanged uncertain looks, but Daniel could see a spark of curiosity forming over. The next weeks, Daniel drilled them in strange exercises. He had them blindfolded while sparring, forcing them to rely on hearing instead of sight. He threw unexpected objects at them in the middle of training, teaching them to react without hesitation. He made them fight in mud, in darkness, and even without weapons. At first, they resisted. Many grumbled that his methods were foolish, even insulting. But slowly, they began to see results. Soldiers who once panicked when surprised now adapted quickly. They learned to fight in uneven conditions, to improvise with whatever they had. One day, during a mock battle, a young warrior disarmed Daniel and thought the fight was over. Daniel simply snatched up a handful of dirt and flung it into his opponent's face before tackling him to the ground. The onlookers roared with laughter, but the lesson was clear. There was always another way. The soldiers began to respect him, not as a symbol, not as a consort to their queen, but as a fighter who had survived the impossible. Aerolith often watched these sessions, her expression calm but her eyes filled with quiet pride. One evening, after the training had ended, she joined Daniel in the empty yard. The lanterns burned low, and the air carried the faint scent of burned metal. "They listen to you now," she said softly. Daniel wiped sweat from his forehead. "Yeah, took a while. But they're learning." "You gave them something we could not," Aerolith continued. "We taught them to be perfect. You taught them to be human, to endure, to survive." Daniel chuckled. "We're not perfect, far from it, but sometimes that's what saves us." Aerolith studied him for a long moment. Then she asked, "Do you ever regret it? Saving me that day?" Daniel looked at her, surprised by the question. "Regret it? No. I didn't think about laws or traditions. I just saw someone trapped, and I helped. That's it." Her lips curved slightly. And yet that simple choice changed everything. He shrugged. "Maybe. But I'd do it again, 100 times." For a moment, silence settled between them, filled only by the distant hum of the city. Then Aerolith whispered, almost to herself, "Perhaps fate does not make mistakes after all." The following days proved how much the training mattered. Scouts reported that the rival faction was preparing another strike, this time with ground, forces aiming to infiltrate the capital. Daniel led the soldiers he had trained to intercept them. When the enemy ambushed from the shadows, the Veyari warriors adapted quickly, turning the surprise into a counterattack. They fought with flexibility, using every trick Daniel had taught them. When the battle ended, the Veyari stood victorious. The soldiers, once skeptical, now cheered Daniel's name alongside their queen's. Back in the palace, nobles could no longer deny his value. Whispers of outsider were replaced with murmurs of commander and teacher. For Daniel, it wasn't about titles. It was about survival, his, theirs, and the queen's. But deep down, he also felt something else growing, belonging. That night, in the quiet of the palace gardens, Daniel and Aerolith walked together. The air shimmered with the glow of alien flowers, and the stars burned bright above. "They follow you now," Araleth said. "You have given them more than skill. You have given them trust." Daniel shook his head. "They follow you. I'm just helping." Araleth stopped, turning to face him. "No, Daniel. They follow us." For the first time, Daniel truly believed it. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He wasn't just a man who had stumbled into a strange tradition. He was part of something greater, something that could reshape the bond between humans and Veyari forever. And as Araleth's violet eyes met his, filled with quiet strength and warmth, Daniel realized the truth he hadn't admitted even to himself. This was no longer just about duty. It was about choice. His choice to stand beside her, not only as her savior, not only as her consort, but as her partner. The warning came at dawn. The rival faction's fleet, larger than before, was moving toward the capital. Scouts reported that it wasn't just a raid this time, it was a full assault. Their goal was clear: remove Queen Araleth, and with her, gone, destroy the strange human bond that had unsettled the empire. The palace stirred into chaos. Couriers rushed through the halls, generals barked orders, and soldiers prepared for war. The sky above already glowed faintly red with the light of enemy engines. Daniel stood at the center of it all, the weight of the moment pressing down on his chest. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He wasn't just a guest. He was the Queen's consort, bound by both law and choice, and today he had to prove it. Araleth entered the war chamber, her silver gown replaced by dark armor that shimmered with violet light. She looked every part the warrior queen, but when her eyes met Daniel's, he saw the same woman he had pulled from the rubble weeks ago. "They come for us," she said simply. Daniel nodded. "Then we don't let them take anything." The Veyari fleet launched first, soaring into the skies above the capital. Daniel and Araleth stood side by side on the command deck of her flagship, watching the stars fill with fire. The battle began quickly. Enemy ships swarmed like a storm, blasting through defenses, their crimson hulls cutting across the void. The capital's shields trembled under the bombardment. Daniel studied the holographic display, his instincts kicking in. "They're spreading. Too thin," he said. "They're trying to surround us. If we hit their center hard and fast, we can break their line." Some Veyari commanders doubted him, but Araleth's voice cut through the hesitation. "Do as he says." The fleet shifted. Veyari ships surged into the enemy's heart, striking with speed and precision. For a moment, the tide turned. The crimson formation buckled. But then, from the shadows, more enemy ships emerged. It had been a trap. The deck shook violently as blasts rocked the flagship. Officers shouted in panic. The enemy was pushing harder than ever. Daniel clenched his fists. "They're trying to cut us off from the city. If they land troops, the palace will fall." Araleth looked at him. "Then we must fight them on the ground." Moments later, Daniel found himself back in armor, standing with Veyari soldiers on the palace walls. The enemy had landed. Crimson banners rippled as alien warriors stormed forward, their weapons flashing with deadly light. The city burned, streets filled with smoke and fire as civilians fled to safety. But at the palace gates, the defenders held. Daniel barked orders like he had in the old days. "Spread out. Don't hold tight lines. They'll break you. Use cover. Keep moving." The Veyari soldiers listened. They trusted him now, after weeks of strange training. They fought not with rigid formations, but with flexibility, ambushing enemies from alleys, striking from rooftops, and turning the palace grounds into a maze of resistance. Still, the enemy was relentless. Step by step, they pushed closer. Daniel fought with everything he had, blocking strikes, firing his rifle, rallying soldiers who faltered. Every time he thought they would be overrun, he remembered the promise he had made, to stand by Araleth, and then he saw her. Araleth herself had taken the field, her violet blade flashing as she struck down enemies. She moved with grace and fury. her crown glinting even in the smoke. To her soldiers, she was more than a queen. She was hope. For a brief moment, Daniel paused, watching her. She wasn't just royalty. She wasn't just someone bound to him by law. She was his partner. The enemy pressed harder. At one point, a massive war machine rolled forward, crushing walls and scattering defenders. Soldiers panicked, falling back. Daniel shouted, "Hold the line! Follow me!" He grabbed explosives from a fallen soldier and sprinted across the battlefield. Araleth shouted his name, but he didn't stop. He slid under the machine's legs, planted the charges, and dove away, just as the blast tore it apart. The explosion lit the sky, and the soldiers roared in triumph. But Daniel staggered to his feet, bruised and bleeding. Araleth rushed to his side, her hand gripping his arm. "You could have died," she said, her voice trembling. Daniel gave a tired smile. "Yeah, but so could all of us if that thing got through." She looked into his eyes, her expression softening, even in the chaos of battle. "You are more Veyari than many born here." He shook his head. "No, just human. And that's enough." The battle raged on until the sun began to rise. At last, with their war machine destroyed and their lines broken, the rival faction began to retreat. The defenders surged forward, driving them out of the city. By midday, the skies cleared. The enemy ships fled into the void, leaving behind silence and smoke. The capital still stood. The queen still lived. And beside her, a human soldier still held his ground. That evening, in the great hall of the palace, the survivors gathered. Soldiers knelt before their queen, nobles bowed their heads, and the people sang songs of victory. Araleth stood tall, her armor dented and her face weary, but her voice carried strength. "Today we stood not as divided peoples, but as one. Today a human fought beside us, not as outsider, but as brother. Let all who doubt see this truth. Unity is our strength." The hall thundered with cheers. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, unused to being praised. But when Araleth reached for his hand and raised it high, he couldn't deny the pride swelling in his chest. In that moment, he was no longer just Daniel the soldier. He was Daniel of the Veyari, the man who had turned an act of kindness into an alliance that changed the stars. Later, when the hall was quiet and only the soft hum of the city remained, Daniel and Araleth stood together on the balcony. "You changed everything," Araleth said softly. Daniel shook his head. "No, we did. You trusted me when you didn't have to. That's what changed everything." Her violet eyes met his, filled with warmth. "Do you regret it? That moment in the ruins?" Daniel thought of all that had happened, the fear, the battles, the doubts, the bond that had grown between them, and he smiled. Not for a second. For a long while, they stood in silence, side by side, watching the stars stretch endlessly before them. Two lives, once worlds apart, now bound together. The galaxy would remember the war. It would remember the battles. But more than that, it would remember the human soldier who saved a queen, and how, together, they reshaped the future of two species. Not because of power, not because of politics, but because on one broken night he just tried to help.